So to get started here, make sure I have my clicker. Just by way of introduction, explain who I am. My name is Rick Davis. I am the copyright and scholarly communications librarian for Cook Library. I'm also a cataloging librarian. And I just thought I would go over very briefly how I was introduced to the concept of open educational resources. First, obviously, in my role as a copyright librarian, scholarly communications librarian, but I became familiar with it first, I think, through the notion of open access publishing and the serials crisis in libraries, with the huge rates of inflation that libraries have been facing since back when I was in library school, when I first heard about this concept, and even before then. Steady rates of journal price inflation with static library budgets, and the whole notion of basically we in academia giving our work away for free, and consistently with a centuries-old tradition of scholarly communications, and then having a lot of universities that employ researchers and government funding of research, and then having us have to then go ahead and pay for that to get access to that research again. So the whole open access concept became very important to me. And then, of course, in my role as copyright librarian, I get a lot of questions from students and faculty about how and whether they can use certain materials in class presentations or in other things they're putting together. So that led to not only a greater appreciation on my part for the growing amounts of public domain materials that you can access now online, but also things that are now available, again, growing exponentially, under Creative Commons licenses and other types of open licenses where work is posted online and then is available for others to not only access but then to reuse and modify. So, and then finally getting to open educational resources from that background. I said I'd be brief, so I'm trying to. Again, same concept as the serials crisis. Prices constantly going up, sort of static budgets. Well, students face the same kind of conundrum. Their textbook prices constantly going up, and we've all known how, in past decades, for most people, wages have been pretty flat or stagnant. So, with the cost of textbooks consistently outpacing the rate of inflation, I'll get to that a little later. It sort of struck me as a very, similar issue, and again, wouldn't it be a lot better to have access to educational materials that people can reuse, modify, share for free rather than going through commercial publishers and paying those prices. Okay, so open, as we probably all know, is one of the most overused buzzwords in contemporary discourse. Open source is probably one of the earliest uses. This referred to computer programs whose human-readable source code was made available for others to modify, debug, reverse engineer, build upon, and distribute. In the 60s and 70s, when most computer programmers were associated with universities and government or corporate research centers, sharing the source code was the norm in that field. And this is something that was picked up from the centuries-old academic practice of sharing your work for the common good for scientific and cultural advancement. Then, as operating systems and application software became more complex, demanding greater investment in time and development, programs became more proprietary. And so then you started having companies requiring programmers to sign non-disclosure agreements, protecting their works with patents and copyrights. So the free software movement arose in reaction to this in the 1980s, with Richard Stallman as one of the primary figures. He kind of well known, I guess, he circulated this idea of free software, and he would say free as in speech, not free as in beer. So it's free to reuse. It's not free just in cost, but free to reuse, modify, and share. So the free software movement, which was idealistic and ideological in nature, led to the open source movement, which was more pragmatic and utilitarian. The open source movement focused on the gains that could be realized through the open development of computer programs by everyone contributing to their development. So you had faster development, fewer bugs, more innovative and user-centered programs as a result. So that's open source, and a lot of this sort of these notions fed into OERs, which I'll get to. Open data, I also have on the slide here. Has the same practical orientation as open source software. It advocates for making research data available on the internet for anyone to download, copy, analyze, reprocess, data mine. Some of the prominent examples of this are the Human Genome Project and the Large Hadron Collider. Again, the idea that they're driven by the idea that research data, whether it's data sets, statistics, transcripts, survey results, and the metadata associated with that data can be better utilized for the common good if it isn't restricted in individual silos. Sometimes connections can be made on new research avenues new research avenues discovered that weren't apparent or even of interest to those who originally collected the data. So that's open data. Open government refers to transparency, the right of citizens to access government documents for greater democracy, citizen involvement, et cetera. And then open science encompasses a range of practices, including open data, as well as open methodology or open notebook science, where researchers let others see their process as they're doing it, open peer review and open access publication. But the primary one I want to focus on this slide is open access. And perhaps the reason to focus on that is because it's perhaps the result of the most confusion when it comes to OER. Open access arose out of the serials crisis that I mentioned before, coming from the realization that the internet makes possible a much better system for disseminating scholarly research, especially when so much research is funded by the government and when researchers are supported by public institutions. So open access advocates for making research, primarily peer-reviewed research, more available to the public that funds it through two means, through open access journals and open access digital archives or repositories. And publishing in open access journals is referred to as gold OA, and scholars self-depositing their research outputs in repositories is referred to as green OA. But with open access, the emphasis is on scholarly research outputs, not on teaching and learning materials, as it is with OER. So an article published in an open access journal or deposited in a disciplinary repository like arXiv or the Social Science Research Network, or in our very own scholarly repository here at Towson, ScholarWorks at Towson, might become an open educational resource if it is assigned to students to read in a course and it's put to a teaching and learning purpose. But usually when someone refers to open access, they're referring to scholarly publishing, not to specifically using those materials in teaching and learning. Okay. So again, going back to how we got to this, to OERs, Richard Stallman and the free software movement as a forerunner of OERs, the new general publication license and the free documentation license arose in the late 80s, early 90s. The new general publication license guarantees end users the freedom to run, study, share, copy, and modify the software that it's attached to. And it also requires those rights to be retained in any derivatives created upon that software. That's often referred to as copyleft, when you make others retain those rights to reuse the material. In fact, the new free documentation license was designed for manuals, textbooks, and other reference and instructional materials that accompanied new software. But it can be used for any text-based work, regardless of subject matter. In fact, Nupedia, the early version of Wikipedia from 1999 to 2003, used the GFDL. And Wikipedia itself now uses the GFDL along with a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license for all of its text. And then moving on, late 90s, David Wiley, who was a former university webmaster, applied the concepts behind this open source software movement to other types of works, and he was focusing primarily on education. How can we make content available for others to use to educate people across the world? So he coined this notion of open content, and he released the open content license and the open publication license. Those are sort of forerunners of what we now refer to as Creative Commons licenses. And then also in the late 1990s, Connections, one of the first open access, open textbook repositories, was founded at Rice University. So moving on, Creative Commons was founded in 2001. Larry Lessig and people he worked with at Stanford University created this, and David Wiley himself conceded that Creative Commons was a better tool for what he was trying to accomplish with his open publication license because it was actually created by lawyers, people who knew the law, whereas he was an educator and he was focused on that. And then in 2002, we have the first use of the phrase open educational resources at the UNESCO Forum on the Impact of Open Courseware. and we have Creative Commons licenses published after the founding. Licenses may become available in December 2002. And then at the bottom of the slide here, I just have some of the official declarations. This is often referred to as the BBB definition of open access. I'm including it here, hopefully not to confuse you, because again, we want to keep open access and OERs distinct, but just to sort of get a sense of the parallel development of these concepts as during this time period. And then finally, we have the Open Courseware Consortium established in 2005. This was a global network of educational institutions, individuals, and organizations supporting open education efforts, collaboration, innovation, and collective development of open education materials. And then in 2008, the Cape Town Open Education Declaration, which arose from a meeting convened in late 2007 by the Open Society Institute and the Shuttleworth Foundation in Cape Town. And it's described on its website as a statement of principle, a statement of strategy, and a statement of commitment. It is meant to spark dialogue, to inspire action, and to help the open education movement grow. So again, this is this sort of movement internationally to sort of everyone hitch their wagons to this movement and try to keep it moving forward. The Cape Town Open Education Declaration currently has over 2,700 signatories, committing to 3 strategies: participating in open education as educators and learners, creating and distributing open educational resources, and advocating for open education policies with governments, school boards, colleges, and universities. Going back for a second to David Wiley and his concept of open content, this is how he defined it, and this is pretty key because he defined it not only in terms of the work being available, freely available, but also being subject to what he calls the 5R activities: retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. So this is where the real power of OER comes in, because you can take an existing OER and modify it, improve it based on your own experience using it so that it works more effectively in your classroom. Originally he had just 4 Rs. He added the first one, they're in reverse order. He added retain more recently when he realized that a lot of textbook publishers were moving towards a sort of access model where you buy your textbook, even an online textbook. Well, you buy an online textbook and you have access to it for a short period of time, and then you no longer have access to it. So you're losing access to this learning material that you had and might want to refer back to. So that's another advantage of OERs, is that you can retain them indefinitely. And then he also, the last 2 points in this slide, he points out that there's some disagreement in the community about whether or not you should have any restrictions on open content. For instance, Creative Commons has different licenses where you can say that others can use it but not for a commercial purpose, or they can use it but they can't create any derivative works based on the work. So he concedes that there's some disagreement there, but he just says that having these requirements on there does have the effect of making the content less open, so people should be aware of that when they place those restrictions on it. And then also the last point about technical choices, that's really about what he calls the ALMS framework, which stands for, well, the first part of ALMS is access to editing tools. Can the open content be revised or remixed only with expensive or rare tools or platforms? Again, that makes it less usable, less open. The L in ALMS is level of expertise required to revise or remix. Do you have to have some kind of special training in order to use the content or not? M is meaningfully editable. Is the content published in a format that allows for editing and revising? And then S is self-sourced. Is the format preferred for using or consuming the open content the same format that's preferred for revising or remixing it? Again, making things as simple as possible so that materials can be used, reused, and redistributed. Okay, so Creative Commons, again, I mentioned this as you have different license options with Creative Commons. Creative Commons, has everyone heard of Creative Commons? You're familiar with it? It's a way for creators to share their work online, attach a license to it, and allow others to know that it's okay to use it for certain purposes. And these licenses tell you what are the various restrictions placed on it. So the most permissive license is the CC BY license, which just basically says you can use this so long as you attribute me as the creator. Then you can do whatever you want with it. And then we go down the line to the various, getting down to the most restricted, which is the attribution, non-commercial, no derivatives. So that means you have to attribute the creator of the work. You can only use it for non-commercial purposes, and you cannot create any derivative works based upon it. Okay, so now getting down even further. We went from open content, now we're getting down to open educational resources. So there are many definitions. In fact, there's a Creative Commons page on my later version of this presentation, which I don't have. But Creative Commons actually has a page to 6 different definitions of OERs. And they have a graph showing what are the common elements and which ones are left out. But the one I like best is this one from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, which is one of the major contributors to research and development of OERs, along with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So they call OERs, they say that they are teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. Again, 5R permissions. And then they also specify that includes full courses, course materials, modules, textbooks, streaming videos, tests, etc. Any materials or techniques used to support access to knowledge. Some even define OERs as implementation resources, like Creative Commons licenses that make OERs possible, or software, open source software that allows you to share the content as OERs. So we have this notion that OERs are not just, a few years back, MOOCs were the big rage, right? Massively open online courses. Originally, my understanding is most MOOCs were open content. They were licensed for reuse, but then later, more and more, they became more restricted, and you couldn't make creative works based on them, or derivative works based on them. You had to leave them the way they were and just use them the way you couldn't really repurpose them and revise them. Okay, so now getting into why do we have OERs? This was in part instigated by the realization of the possibilities brought about by the internet and the spread of digital technologies. It's a lot easier to share our work now, to create and share our work at no marginal cost. But OERs have found some of their strongest proponents through these financial concerns, namely students. College affordability is a very prominent issue in public policy over the last couple decades. And according to this graphic from the College Board, the average estimated cost, you probably can't see all the numbers, but the average estimated cost of books and supplies for undergrads in 2015-2016 is about $1,300 per year. I've also seen the figure $1,200 per year thrown out, but I think that's based on older data. So it's somewhere between $1,200 and $1,300 per year. And students in community colleges are hit particularly hard by this. In some cases, the cost of books and course materials is 1.5 times the actual cost of their tuition, just for the books. And then this slide shows data from the U.S. Government Accountability Office report from 2013, and they reported that textbook prices rose in the 10-year period from 2002 to 2012 at an average of 6% per year, while tuition rose an average of 7%, and overall prices rose an average of 2%. So you get a sense of the wide scale here of the inflation of textbooks and tuition. And then over this 10-year period, textbook prices nearly doubled, rising 82%, while overall consumer prices grew by just 28%. And again, this is during a time when, as we know, wages have been flat or declining, especially for those at the lower rungs of the income scale. So people who are trying to earn a degree or a certificate at a community college to retrain, to enter a new profession, or perhaps young students trying to become the first in their family to go to college, this hits them particularly hard. It's a very real issue for them. And students have definitely taken notice. So for over 10 years, going back to at least 2004, from what I can tell looking at their website, the student public interest research groups have issued report after report about what they call the broken textbook industry. The latest report, just issued this month, is called Covering the Cost. And I have some of the main findings of that report here. Again, you have the high rate of inflation for college textbooks. In the survey that they ran, 30% of the students replied that they had used financial aid to pay for their textbooks. 50% of students who went to community colleges used financial aid for their textbooks. And then for those who used financial aid, the amount they put toward purchasing textbooks was more than $300 on average per semester, so about $600 per year. And so nearly 5.2 million US undergraduate students spent a total of $1.5 billion of financial aid on textbooks every semester, or $3 billion per year, which is pretty outrageous when you think about it. Also in another survey that I read about, 60% of students who were surveyed said they had chosen to go without a required textbook due to cost, and 35% reported that they had chosen to take fewer courses in a semester due to textbook and course materials costs. And that's a pretty common number that I've seen cited many places. And of course, Those of you who are faculty know that you lose valuable class time waiting each semester for students to get their copies of assigned text at the beginning of the semester because the campus bookstore is out of stock or the shipment was delayed. With OERs, content is available day one. Everyone's got access to it. It's there. Some faculty have also reported that they've found themselves with commercial textbooks teaching to the textbook rather than teaching with the course learning outcomes as their primary focus, in part to justify that huge expense that students have to invest in for that textbook. So they want to make sure it's worth it to the students. So it kind of changes priorities in a weird way. And again, I mentioned the student PIRGs and their interest in this issue. Here in Maryland, the USM Student Council put forth a proposal which led to the creation of MOST, the Maryland Open Source Textbook Initiative, which is run in collaboration with the USM Student Council and the USM Center for Academic Innovation, which is sort of the system version of LaTanya's office at the system level. In spring 2014, 11 faculty from 7 higher ed institutions in Maryland adopted open textbooks through MOST, saving 1,100 students cumulatively more than $130,000 in textbook costs. Here at Towson, we've had about 20 instructors express an interest in participating in MOST. 3 faculty members from Towson taught with OERs in spring 2015 in mathematics, music, and women's and gender studies. And then 3 more taught with OERs through MOST in fall 2015 in early childhood education, economics, and special ed. And then the rest of those 19 or 20 faculty members who are on the list are either currently building courses under MOST or they're on the waiting list to build courses with OERs. But of course, again, college affordability, while it's a real issue to students and their families, but David Wiley has again written that the real power of OER lies in the 5R permissions, since that makes OER not only free but improvable. The 5R permissions of OERs allow for continuous improvement of OERs based on demonstrated learning results. OERs are not static like commercial textbooks, and the instructor decides what needs to be revised, not the publisher. So you're driving the change that you want to see in the course materials. Anyway, David Wiley, he has a really great blog. And he had a recent post like a week or 2 ago. He was responding to a story, an AP News story, that quoted the executive director of the higher ed division of the Association for American Publishers. And he was critiquing the open education resource movement as being unsustainable over the long term. Sure, he says you've got the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation and the Gates Foundation pouring money into this, but sooner or later that money's going to dry up, and then how are you going to sustain this? Who's going to create these resources? Well, David Wiley pointed out the irony in that, because as we saw in our previous slide, we've currently got $3 billion per year of US financial aid going directly to those publishers through our students and their financial aid. So if we want to talk about sustainability, there's a real issue there. So we can spend a lot less money and then maybe use some of that unspent money towards lowering students' tuitions and helping to fund our colleges. Okay, so now getting to finding OER. There are numerous repositories out there where you can go and search for content. You can browse based on discipline or by grade level. This is just a sort of smattering. Most of the ones on this slide, if not all of them, are primarily private organizations that have put together repositories, although not all of them. And then I've got a few more. Second slide here. These are ones that are associated with higher ed institutions in the US and around the world. Some of them are subject-based, like the physics PHET, which has physics simulations online for people to use. And then we have open courseware, and we also have just general open content, whether it could be, again, learning modules, presentations, videos, any content that's open for reuse and repurposing. So this is where the challenge comes in for faculty, I think, is there are so many repositories out there. Where do you begin? And I'm hoping maybe Julie can give us some benefit from her experience at UMUC, because they've already gone through this process and they've sort of, had faculty who needed some assistance in finding resources and determining where to go. Some company like Lumen is one of on my previous slide. That's David Wiley's company. David Wiley was at BYU. I don't know if he still is, but he also founded this company, Lumen, and they are also participating in the MOST initiative. So faculty are working in MOST with Lumen, and Lumen is helping them find course content that they can use in their teaching. And then finally, I want to talk about what are the possible roles for the two sponsors of this event, Cook Library and OAI? Obviously, faculty members are the subject matter experts in their disciplines, so they are going to be the primary selectors of content. They know the content better than we do. So it's just the same as with traditional course materials. They're currently choosing the best textbook they feel will meet their teaching needs, and that will continue with OERs. But I wonder, and I'm just throwing this out there as something to think about going forward as we go to these next two sessions in this series, what roles the library might have. We have library liaisons for all disciplines on campus. Perhaps the liaisons who are very experienced evaluating information resources in general can have a role in helping faculty and helping to broaden our role in terms of ensuring student success. And then the Office of Academic Innovation has an extensive background in instructional design, course redesign, and faculty professional development. So again, that's another possible source of support as our faculty look to adopting OERs. So research on the use and effectiveness of OERs and the perception of OERs. I've got 3 links here. I'll distribute this PowerPoint to those who are interested. The first one, the Open Education Group Review Project, is really great because it brings all the known research on OERs to date on this website. And to summarize, they basically found that students learn just as well, if not better, with OERs than they do with traditional textbooks. And students and faculty have equally favorable impressions of OERs and traditional materials, with a significant number of them preferring OERs after they've had a chance to use them. The Babson Survey Research Group report, Opening the Curriculum, reported that a large number of faculty said they classified themselves as being unaware of OERs, but once they had the concept explained to them, they were willing to try it out. And then among those faculty who knew about OERs and who offered an opinion, 3/4 of them ranked OER quality as the same or better than traditional course materials. And the report also found that the most significant barrier to wider adoption of OER is faculty perception of the time and effort required to find and evaluate it. So again, critical role for us in the library and in OAI to provide faculty support as they move towards considering OERs. So with that, as I mentioned, I'm hoping that leads as a good segue into Julie's presentation, which is on their experience at University of Maryland University College in moving towards OERs for all their courses.
Okay. Well, thanks, Rick, for that great overview of open access and OERs and the textbook problem and Creative Commons information. That was really interesting and useful even to me. When you all introduced yourself, it was kind of hard for me to hear, but I've heard librarian a lot. So maybe just by a show of hands, could I see how many people are actually librarians?
We also have folks in the bookstore here,
okay, from the bookstore.
Yeah.
How about faculty? How many faculty do you have?
No faculty, sadly, but we are recording, so hopefully we can get that way.
How about administration? Were there a few people from administration?
A couple.
A couple? Oh, okay, good. Okay, well, anyway, so I'm the Assistant Director for Public Services at the UMUC Library, and I also coordinate the OER e-resources project from the library side. So first I'll just give you a little bit of information about UMUC in general, and then a bit of history about our move to textbook-free classrooms. And I'm assuming there will be quite a few questions afterwards, so I see that there's Q&A time for that afterwards. So UMUC, as you all know, is part of the University System of Maryland, and we have more than 80,000 worldwide students and faculty with 90 bachelor's and master's programs and 2 doctoral programs. The majority of our classes are online, and with the exception of a few overseas locations, there really are no more strictly face-to-face classes here. They're either all online or they're hybrid. And most of our students here are non-traditional working adults or military students. So Rick already gave you a really good overview of about the rising cost of textbooks, and this really has made it financially difficult for a lot of students to obtain the needed materials for a course. And we at the library have a lot of students coming to us asking for copies of textbooks, which of course you know, as a rule, the USM does not keep textbooks in the collection. And some students, you know, will go through a course with an older edition of a book or without a book at all. So these problems prompted the 2013 announcement from the president of UMUC to announce that we would be going textbook free. And here's just a couple of screenshots of some of the press that we received after that announcement. So the no textbook timeline, this was mandated by the president of the university, and the entire undergraduate curriculum would go textbook free within an 18-month period, and that began in the winter of 2013, and we finished up in the summer of 2015. So that created quite a flurry with everyone in the university, just basically focusing that on a priority. For ever since that time, we've been focusing on that as a priority. So the university began working together to try to make it happen. And the project began as a team approach, and it's still a team approach, with academic directors, subject matter experts, instructional designers, course designers, programmers, and librarians all working together. So as I said, we began with the undergraduate school. We had probably about 400 courses to do in an 18-month period. We began by having meetings between subject matter experts and librarians. We would get together and talk for several hours, and we would go through the syllabus of the course and the resources that were currently being used, and we'd come up with search terms that librarians could use to search for resources for the course. We began assigning courses to the librarians, and we found that we had to limit to 8 hours of searching per course, or we just couldn't get it done in the timeline. And as I said, we began in the winter of 2013 and finished all the courses by the summer of 2015 for the undergraduate school. We are currently doing the graduate school courses. We have a much faster timeline this time. We were only given 4 months to do 350 courses. So what happened was the university hired temps to actually search for the OERs. And so the temps will search for the OERs, and then they'll pass it on to the librarians, and we will search for subscription resources that can be used in the classroom. So we have 10 librarians working on this, and we have to do 20 courses per week to stay on schedule. It's really time intensive. It's a lot of work and a lot of overtime. So once the librarians have finished their searching for a course, the program directors get it next, and then they review the resources that were found by the temps and the librarians. And then they decide what actually goes in the course. Rick gave you some information about OERs that are out there, but here's a list of just some of the more popular collections. And then UMUC has an OER LibGuide that actually lists all of the places that you can go online to find OERs. It's quite a long list, and I'll send my presentation so you all can have a link to this. And here are some of the library collections that we use to search for resources that are subscription-based. Some of these we can no longer use, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. There have been many challenges and solutions along the way. We're still looking for solutions to some of the problems. The first problem that I'll discuss is availability, and for some disciplines, you know, resources are really easy to come by. Last week I was searching for a course on supply chain management, and there was just tons of material out there in the databases and online. But for very specific courses like systems engineering disciplines, for example, computer science things, there may be very little useful scholarly or open access material. In some rare cases, departments have gotten approval for waivers because the materials that they need just simply are not available for free or through the library databases. In particular, some English literature courses, just, you know, the readings that they needed for those courses just were not available online because of copyright. So they were able to get a waiver for some of those courses. Database restrictions have also been a big issue. On my previous slide, you saw that we started out using Books 24/7, which was a great resource because sometimes you can, or a lot of times, you could just find a book in there that would just replace the textbook. But because we have so many students in war zones and in areas where they just don't have a stable internet connection, the administration here decided that if you couldn't completely download the material, then it couldn't be used. So Books 24/7 was off the table for that reason. Also, we have other ebook databases like Safari that have really good books on computer science and technical issues, and we can't use those because there's only 8 concurrent users, and it just would be way too expensive to go to unlimited use. So there's some that we just can't use. Also, Harvard can't link to any Harvard articles, just too cost prohibitive. Rick already went over Creative Commons and the 5 R permissions for Creative Commons. So anybody that's searching for OERs needs to understand copyright and Creative Commons licensing before they recommend that a resource goes into a classroom. You need to really understand that it's usable. And one thing that we're trying to promote to faculty here is that they can actually create things and make them usable for other people to use. So we in the library are trying to educate faculty to that point that you're not to just take, but to also give. The other problem is URLs and URLs. When a program director or faculty member adds a library resource to a classroom, it has to have that easy proxy. The URL has to have been built correctly so that when the student clicks the link, they are taken to the student authentication screen and can actually access the document. If that's not built correctly, then they'll either get a broken link or they'll get the vendor login page, and then they come to the library and say they can't get to the resource. 404 and page not found errors are quite common and a big issue. Just because an OER is available on a website one day doesn't guarantee that it will be there in 6 months when the student clicks the link. So quality assurance over the open access resources is really important and something that really needs to be taken into account before planning to use those in classrooms. I mean, you just have to go back quite frequently, have someone go back quite frequently and click these links and make sure that the resources are still there. Problem reporting is also something that should definitely be taken into account before adding any links to OERs in classrooms. When a student has a problem accessing a link, whether it's because the correct URL wasn't available or because an OER has disappeared or gone away from the web, there needs to be some kind of a reporting mechanism in place. At this point, students usually report it to the library, and then the librarian will investigate and then report it to the course designers, and then they go into the classroom and fix the issue. We actually did a study of our reference service, our reference desk, for the month of October, this past October, and we found that 13% of the questions that were asked that month were related to technical issues with readings in the classroom. So that's definitely of major concern. And then there's one other thing that I wanted to show. This just came yesterday, and look who's trying to join the affordable textbook revolution, the publishers. So I imagine that this will also be a trend where the publishers, and this one came from Springer, but the publishers, they see what's happening, and they see, you know, that universities are moving away from textbooks, and so they are kind of advertising the ebooks that are in their collection as affordable textbooks, you know, affordable ways to replace textbooks in the classroom. So I imagine that this will probably become more prevalent with other publishers. I think that was all that I had, and I think my time is up, and I'm available for the rest of the time to answer any questions that you have about what UMUC is doing and what the library is doing to help. So thank you all very much.